Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 8, Episode 10, the Andrea Doria. Hello everyone. I hope everyone's doing really well. I'm chugging along here, end of the school year, a lot of activities happening, a lot of excitement. That's pretty much taking up my time, and I guess also trying to figure out some plans for my kids so that the summer does not turn into just screen zombie summer, which sometimes it does. Some days I'm busy with my own stuff and these kids are attached to a screen all day. I feel icky on those days. I'm not proud of myself as a mother on those days, but at the same time, those days are necessary. No, I'm trying to figure out how do I get them every single day to take breaks and not just be attached to their iPads, their devices. You know, when I think back, my parents never put me in camps or really any activities. My parents were out of the house. They were both working. So I would be bored during the day, which I think is a very valuable thing for a child to experience. Be bored. That's what forces you to be creative. And, I had the combination of having strict parents and parents who worked. So they allowed me to be bored and have periods of boredom. So I was too afraid to do anything rebellious with that boredom. So that definitely forced me to kind of look at my creative endeavors. I would a lot of times be in my room, just acting out different scenes from movies. I would write stuff. Don't get me wrong. I watched a ton of TV. I mean, I had my whole TV schedule day planned out. All the syndicated reruns of old shows, the game shows during the day, the talk shows, forget about it. I loved it all. So anyway, I'm just, I work from home and, well, I'm the mother. So that's a double whammy for having kids home for vacation. I do have them signed up for a few camps, but, majority of the summer they're going to be at home. And I'm just trying to figure out some activities that aren't going to be burdensome to them, but also will make me feel better, I guess, as a mother, that I'm not letting my kids just zone out on a screen all the live long day for the summer. So anyway, that's what I'm dealing with today. I just had a good discussion with a friend of mine about this, and we were kind of trading ideas on what to do. And also, it's great. This friend and I, I've really found a good core group of girlfriends who we don't see each other as competitors. We're all pretty comfortable with ourselves and in our own skin. And so we're just sounding boards and super supportive of one another and give each other advice. And it's been great. It's really great. And yeah, this friend and I were just talking about kind of commiserating about the whole thing. She works from home as well. She works outside of the home, but she works part-time. So, and again, it's up to her to figure out her girl's schedule over the summer. And we both just kind of said, you know what, let's just do our best. And if there are days where they're zoned out on their screens, whatever, let's be forgiving to ourselves and give each other grace, because we spend too much time and we waste too much time beating ourselves up. And for what? For nothing. It's for kind of the perception of what we feel we should do. And a lot of times that can be real bullshit pressures we put on ourselves. So anyway, let's just get into this episode. But I should say, if any of you have advice out there, some activities for my kids. Now, again, I don't want to be dropping hundreds of dollars on, going to different places. If I wanted to take them to fun activities, a lot of times that costs money, and I'd rather just do things that don't cost money. If that makes sense. Does that make sense to people? I think we can all relate. Some nice free activities that will be enriching to my kids, but at the same time, doesn't take a lot of my time. So please pass along those ideas. Okay, let's get into this episode. The synopsis for the Andrea Doria is as follows. George is engaged in a competition for sympathy as he tries to win an apartment over a survivor of the Andrea Doria shipwreck. Elaine is troubled to discover her new boyfriend is a bad breaker-upper. Kramer gets dog medicine to treat his violent cough, causing him to act like a dog and bite Newman's ankle. Jerry and Kramer are shocked to discover that Newman has hidden bags and bags of undelivered mail. This episode was written by Spike Ferriston. We start out, the cold open is on the street. Jerry needs to stop in a store that doesn't allow any food or drinks, but Kramer has a hot dog and a pretzel. He wants to go in with Jerry, so he tries to shove it all in his mouth. And of course, in true Kramer fashion, it's not done very gracefully. It's actually pretty gross because he starts gagging. And just as he's about to pass out and choke on all of his food, Jerry's like, you know what? They don't have batteries in here. Never mind, and walks away. Next, we're in Jerry's apartment. George enters absolutely busting. He says he's moving. He found this fantastic apartment. Jerry's like, is it better than mine? Oh, yeah, he says. George wants to call Elaine since his new apartment is much better than hers as well, but Jerry says, oh no, she's out. Oh, right, George remembers. The blind date. Well, they call it a setup now. I guess blind people didn't want to be associated with all those losers. George wants Jerry to come see his place, but he says he can't. He's meeting Kramer at his mini storage. Oh, George asks if he has any extra furniture there because he needs something for that second bedroom with the walk-in closet. Ugh, Jerry is so annoyed. It's working already, George says. Next, we're at the mini storage. Jerry and Kramer are approaching his unit, and Kramer is coughing violently. Jerry is so grossed out by it. Jerry wonders where Kramer's key is, and he's like, well, Newman's got it. You know, I rented half my space to you, and I rented half my space to Newman, Kramer says. Jerry opens the door, and all these mail bags come tumbling out. He's storing mail in here? Evidently. Next, we're in George's new apartment. A woman enters and he just brushes her off. Nope, no menus. Turns out she's actually the president of the Tenants Association, Mrs. Riccardi. So George perks up, tells her how much he loves the place and that the floor reminds him of a gymnasium. And he tries to, I guess, play basketball with her. Try and guard me. Well, she informs him that they've decided to let Clarence Eldridge in 8C have the apartment. But you promised it to me, George says. Yes, she says, but Mr. Eldridge is an Andrea Doria survivor. So in light of all the suffering he's been through, they thought it best to let him have the apartment. George deflates and he starts walking out. Oh, yes, Andrea Doria. It was quite a fire. Shipwreck. I remember it, he says. The actress in this scene is Diana Bellamy. She plays Mrs. Riccardi. She's also appeared in Married with Children, Air Force One, and a series called Popular. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2001 from cancer. And she's perfectly fine, very straightforward character, Mrs. Riccardi. And I think Diana Bellamy plays it very well. All right, next we're in a restaurant. Elaine is at a table waiting for her date, and she's so annoyed because he's late. She says she should have brought something to read. So she starts reading the Sweet and Low packet and says, cancer in laboratory animals. The waiter approaches and asks if she's Elaine Bennis. Yeah, and Alan Mercer called for you. Says he won't be able to make it tonight. He's been stabbed. Elaine is shocked. Stabbed? Would you like more bread? My take on this scene. So we're setting up Elaine's plot here. She gets stood up by a stabbing victim. And I always enjoy the voiceover, hearing her thoughts, how much she hates waiting. Now, I've never been on a blind date, but I would imagine it's very awkward. I mean, there's so much that goes into it, wondering if you will like the person and depending on if you like them or not, that affects your relationship with the person who set you up. I do remember once in college, I guess it was sort of a setup, not a blind date per se, but I was invited to a party where the host also invited a guy that she thought I would like. And he was such a dud and kind of mean. I remember he made fun of where I went to college and I was like, Is this your idea of charming me? Well, needless to say, it totally fizzled out. But I was pretty annoyed at the girl who thought we'd hit it off. Although in retrospect, she had a lot of the same personality traits as that guy, like really judgy, really insulting. So I guess it made sense that she thought he was great. The bread line at the end, the more bread at the end of the scene, that subtle change in Elaine's expression, it's such a fun reaction, such a fun choice by JLD. I absolutely love it. All right, next we're in Jerry's apartment. Jerry's baffled. You ate more bread? Elaine's looking at him annoyed. That's not the point. The guy was stabbed. Jerry, of course, wonders who stabbed him, and she says she found out it was an ex-girlfriend. Well, you're not going near this hooligan anymore. Well, Elaine has a different take. Well, think about it, Jerry. There must be something about this guy to arouse that amount of passion. I mean, to be stab-worthy, it's kind of a compliment. Yeah, too bad he didn't get shot. He could have been the one. Kramer enters. He starts eating one of Jerry's grocery store purchases and coughs all over it. Jerry tells him he should really see a doctor about that cough. No way, Kramer says. He's done with doctors. He kind of leans into Jerry. You know, they botched my vasectomy. They botched it? I'm even more potent now. George enters and tells them that the new place is gone. The tenant association decided to give it to an Andrea Doria survivor. Elaine asks if that's the one they did the song about. Jerry corrects her. No, the Edmund Fitzgerald. She says she loves Edmund Fitzgerald's voice. No, he tells her, Edmund Fitzgerald was the boat and it was sung by Gordon Lightfoot. No, she doesn't think so. She thinks Gordon Lightfoot was the boat. Yeah, and it was ran by the Cat Stevens. It's so stupid, but it always makes me giggle. Well, Kramer's got some facts about the Andrea Doria and how it sank. And he knows all of this because of his book, Astonishing Tales of the Sea. Yeah, 51 people died. George is like, that's no tragedy. What, on a normal cruise you lose 30, 40 people? He asks Kramer if he can see that book, and they both exit. Jerry asks Kramer on his way out if he talked to Newman about getting the mail bags out of his storage unit. Yeah, he's not going to do it, he says. My take on this scene, it's such a fun cut from that last scene to Jerry answering what Elaine decided. You ate more bread? JLD's expression when he asks that, it always makes me laugh. Like, you see that she's annoyed that Jerry asked, but there's like a tinge of embarrassment with like a dash of how dare you. I love it. There's so much behind her eyes when she's staring at him. The way that JLD performs that whole, considering, oh, he's stab-worthy. It's so delightful. And Elaine here is fully off the desperation deep end. I mean, she's trying to make positive out of a situation of a guy getting stabbed by his ex-girlfriend. I mean, she's not so quick to discount him. You never know. And the use of stab-worthy, which is, of course, a play on sponge-worthy, is very fun. There's a lot that happens in this scene. Kramer coming in with his cough, George arriving with the news of losing the apartment. I did want to bring up one subtle thing, and I do wonder if this was a conscious choice, and I feel like it was. Anyway, Elaine puts her feet up on the table, so George has to walk over her legs, and she does it right before he approaches. So it's like she sees him kind of coming towards her and she knows he's going to want to walk in front of her. And she puts her legs up on the table. It just strikes me as very funny. Let me know. Do you think that was deliberate on JLD's part? Like, I think Elaine would want to make a barrier here for George. I always love a scene with all four of them involved in the conversation. Again, like I said about that confusion with the Edmund Fitzgerald and Gordon Lightfoot, it's super funny. And it's also a great outtake, too, from the scene, that moment, because Jerry cannot get out. Yeah, and it was ran by the Cat Stevens. He just keeps cracking up. Next, we're in Newman's apartment. Newman's door is ajar, and he's sitting on the couch looking very depressed. Jerry arrives and asks him to get the mail out of his storage space. Well, sometimes we don't get what we want. Jerry's like, what are you talking about? Newman tells him that he didn't get the transfer to Hawaii. So you quit? Jerry asks. Kind of. He says he's still collecting checks, just stopped delivering mail. Well, Jerry insists that he get the mail bags out. It's illegal. Yet it's perfectly legal to crush a man's soul. Well, the law's the law. Next, we're in a park, and Kramer is coughing away. A man approaches walking a couple of dogs, and Kramer hears him cough as well. He tells him, it's a pretty nasty cough you got there. The guy says, what cough? And then Kramer realizes one of the dogs was coughing. Next, we're back at the restaurant, and Elaine is on the date with Alan. She's going on and on about how eating shrimp is just something she loves to do. She's a shrimp eater. All the while, she's waving a knife around and making stabbing motions, and he's flinching a bit, and she notices this. She says, "Oh, I'm sorry." He says, "No, it's okay. Just still a little jumpy." She asks, "What happened there?" "It was just one of those things," he says. "Was she so crazy in love with you? She just couldn't take it anymore?" Or he says, "I don't know. Could be." A woman walks by and says, "Alan?" Then she throws coffee in his face and exits. Elaine gets up. "Is that the woman who stabbed you?" "No, that was a different woman," he says. The actress here is Renee Ashton. She plays the ex-girlfriend. And she has so many credits to her name, including Dexter, General Hospital, This Is Us. It's a super short appearance, but I think she does it pretty well. I believe her as a jilted ex-girlfriend. My take, so the scene starts out with an amusing bit with the knife. It's just okay for me. It kind of presents a bit hacky, the whole shrimp eater thing. I did not love it. We see Alan just so dismissive when Elaine is asking about what happened with the stabbing. So that really clues in the audience that there's more to this story. And I like the way the guy plays it. He's just like, "Nah, I don't know, just one of those things." I do like it ending with the woman throwing coffee in his face, because then we see, this is a pattern. Next, we're at Monk's. Jerry's like, "Another crazed ex-girlfriend?" Elaine says she asked the friend who set them up, and it turns out that Alan is a bad breaker-upper. Bad how? Jerry wonders. She says, when you break up and you say the things you don't mean? Well, he says the mean things you don't mean, but he means them. "I follow," he says. Elaine tells Jerry that she's going to dump him. She can't be with someone who doesn't break up nicely. That's one of the most important parts of a relationship to her. "What's more important?" Jerry asks, and they both just shrug emphatically. My take on this scene, a really fun scene. We get to see the Jerry and Elaine dysfunction at its peak. The dual shrug at the end is so fun and fantastic. And while, I know this is supposed to be humorous to dump a guy because he doesn't break up nicely, I don't disagree with that sentiment. I have to say, so recently, my little girl, she's 13, she had her first boyfriend, and she was recently dumped by him via text. And I think that we can agree that's not breaking up nicely, even if the message was nicely written and the sentiment was nice. Don't break up via text. Do it in person. I know we're talking about a 13-year-old boy doing this, but I know men do this as well. So, yeah, if you want to maybe be with someone who has the maturity to have a conversation with you and break up nicely and not be an asshole afterwards, which there was a whole thing. He broke up with a nicely worded text with good sentiment. And then my daughter found out a couple days later, he dumped her for another girl in the 8th grade. You guys, it was a whole thing. But I was very proud of my daughter. She handled it so well, so maturely. A lot of Taylor Swift and Olivia Rodrigo went into her getting over this and sort of, dealing with the emotions. And I'm very thankful for that. She really bounced back well, and I was so proud of her. Proud mom moment. All right, next we're on the street. Kramer is walking the coughing dog down the street and bumps into George. And George is like, "Well, what's with the dog?" He says, "Oh, this is Smucker's. I borrowed him." He says that he and the dog suffer from the same affliction. And then the dog coughs. And George is like, "What the hell?" So Kramer says, "I'm going to have a vet check us out." George is, of course, confused. And Kramer says how he'll take a vet over an MD any day. They have to know how to treat a number of animals. George wants to cut to the chase here. "You going to take dog medicine?" "You bet we are," Kramer says. All right, next we're in George's new apartment building. George approaches as Mr. Eldridge is entering the new apartment, and he says, "Ahoy, Mr. Eldridge." And he basically mocks the man for his Andrea Doria experience. How the buffet, that's the real ordeal, huh? Then he tells him, according to this book, it took the ship hours to sink. So he asks him to abandon the apartment and let me shove off in this beauty. "Is that what this is all about?" Eldridge asks. "I don't think I'd like you." He exits into the apartment and George yells after him, "That's my apartment, Eldridge. The Stockholm may not have sunk you, but I will." All right, next we're at the vet. Kramer is explaining his symptoms, the dog's symptoms to the vet. And the vet says, "Oh, yeah, we've been seeing a lot of this lately. Been drinking from the toilet?" Kramer is so offended. "No, that's disgusting." Now, a little tidbit. I don't know if you guys noticed, this is the same vet that George takes the squirrel to to mend him after George ran him over. All right, next we're in Monk's. Elaine is there with Alan, and he's all put out. So you're breaking up with me? She's like, breaking up? We've been on one date. Yeah, fine, whatever you say. She's like, all right, good. Okay, so I'll see you around, big head. Elaine's like, what? He tells her, you got a big head. It's too big for your body. And he exits. Elaine is so amused. That's it? That's the best you got? My take on this scene, super fun scene. I do want to shout out, his name is Tom Gallup, who plays Alan. So funny. Such an immature jerk. Yeah, fine, whatever. And his delivery of, you got a big head. It's too big for your body. It always makes me laugh. He's so great in this scene. And also great laugh acting by JLD. That's all you got? Oh, funny. All right, next we're in Jerry's apartment. George is telling Jerry how Eldridge won't give up the apartment and that it's not fair. He suffered like 40 years ago and that he's been suffering for the last 30 years. And Jerry points out that if suffering is what it's going to take to convince this tenant board, maybe he should regale them about the astonishing tales of Costanza. George perks up. Yes. Jerry says, your body of work in this area is unparalleled. Newman knocks on the door. Jerry answers. He says, I'm with people, and slams the door in his face. Asks George, you want a protein shake or something? Nah, I better get moving on this. So he leaves as Newman comes in. He says that the Hawaii transfer is back on because the guy who got it was caught hoarding Victoria's Secret catalogs. So he needs to deliver all that mail he's been storing in his mini storage. But it's 8 bags. Blast. He can't handle that in addition to his usual load of 1. Forget it. Jerry's like, you're giving up that quickly? I usually do, he says, and he gets up to leave. And Jerry's like, wait a second, Newman. It's my dream for you to leave as well, so maybe they can form an alliance. They shake hands, laugh, and Jerry tells him to get the hell out of here. All right, next we're in Jerry's apartment later, and Elaine is there, and Jerry is sorting the mail, and he explains to her why he has to help Newman leave. I mean, Newman's his sworn enemy, lives down the hall from me, from my home, Elaine, where I sleep, where I come to play with my toys. Oh, God, I forgot now. That's a quote from something. Star Trek? I don't remember. But anyway, if you really care, you can Google that. She tells Jerry about Alan's big head comment, and he's confused. It's almost a compliment. And she agrees. It's one of the nicest things anyone's ever said to me. George calls and cancels plans, and he says he needs to get prepared for making his case to the tenant board because they agreed to hear his side. Jerry gets off the phone, and Elaine is so bummed. We're not going to the coffee shop? Doesn't look like it's going to happen. Elaine goes to exit and is assaulted by Kramer's cough at the door. Jerry asks, didn't you get any medication? He's like, yeah, I got some pills, but they taste terrible. Jerry tries to get him to take the pill by shoving it into his mouth, but Kramer spits it out. He's like, what kind of pills are these? Then he realizes he's taking dog medication. You need to see a real doctor, he tells Kramer, but Kramer refuses. Jerry has to go run some errands, and he convinces Kramer to come by shaking his keys. And Kramer gets excited like a dog. My take on the scene, not a ton to what we see here, just need to get a bunch of information out. Elaine is made aware that Jerry is helping Newman, and she tells him about Alan's big head comment. I do love Jerry's reaction and her reaction, how it's one of the nicest things anyone's ever said. Really fun exchange. And I never get this. Why can't Jerry and Elaine go to the coffee shop without George? It's not clear, but I do think it's a funny moment where Elaine's like, oh, we're not going to the coffee shop. All right, next we are in a cab. Elaine is riding in the back seat, and the cab driver asks her to move her head down that he can't see out the back. She scooches down a little, and he keeps telling her, little more, little more. And once she's slumped all the way down, he's like, thank you. My take, a quick scene. This is just to illustrate how the big head thing starts seeping in for Elaine. And cute physical acting here with her sinking down in the seat. I like that the last shot we see is just her eyes kind of darting back and forth. I do have to admit something. It's totally, I stand corrected on this, but I was prepared to talk about this scene mostly about how they had made a really poor choice to have a white actor in brownface as the cab driver. Now, in my research, I did find out he is in fact an Asian actor. He's definitely not in brownface. I don't know. For some reason, he just did not appear to be Asian to me, Indian in particular. But lesson learned, don't judge an actor by his questionable makeup job. And maybe the lighting, I don't know. Something about his face, it just doesn't look natural to me. But at any rate, I'm glad that they did not commit an offensive faux pas. So good job, Seinfeld. Very good decision. All right, next we're in Jerry's car. Kramer is in the back seat and he realizes that they're not on their way to the park. They are going to a doctor's office and he starts freaking out, much like dogs freak out when they figure out they're going to the vet. Next, we're at Monk's. George is there with Frank and Estelle. Woohoo, Frank and Estelle scene. And he tells them, I really want to remember my childhood a bit better. Well, Estelle's distracted because she feels a draft and she wants to move tables. Get out of here, Frank says. We have a booth. Frank, I'm cold. Order a hot dish, he says. Frank is adamant that they have to sit in a booth, saying that he didn't take the subway all the way to New York to sit at a table. Well, she didn't take the subway to sit in a drafty restaurant. Now, George, what is it you wanted to know about your childhood? George is like, having just witnessed the blow up about booth versus table, he's like, you know what? I think I'm pretty clear on it. And Frank says, where's that breeze coming from? And you can just tell Estelle wants to strangle him. Oh, I didn't write anything down for this scene, but this is something we do in our family. Well, me and my husband, not really the kids, but whenever we're at a restaurant and we get sat at a table, I do the thing my parents did. I do the thing that most people did when I worked as a hostess at a Mexican restaurant, which is if they see an open booth, they want the booth. It's just a human nature. So this scene to me is so relatable. And yeah, I'm totally Frank. I'm like, we need to sit in a booth. I'm not going to sit at a table if a booth is available. Who says we have to sit at a booth? All right, next we're on the street at the doctor's office, and Jerry is trying to get Kramer to come out of the car, but Kramer refuses. Jerry tries to pull him out, but then Kramer escapes and runs down the street. Jerry yells after him, "Bad, you are bad, bad neighbor." Next, we're at the new apartment. The tenant board is listening to Eldridge's tale of surviving the Doria shipwreck, and they are so moved. Meanwhile, George is tapping the wall in boredom in the background. They thank Mr. Eldridge and ask George to make his statement. George gets up and waves for Eldridge to get out of the chair. He's so confident. Next, we're at Newman's apartment. Jerry enters and finds that Newman has been hobbled by Kramer. He bit him. Now he can't deliver the mail. He'll never get that transfer. Jerry offers to do it for him. You deliver mail? Newman laughs at him. Jerry's like, well, why not? I guess you're right. It's just walking around and putting it into boxes. And Jerry's excited. I can't believe I'm going to be a mailman. Then we cut to Jerry delivering mail. He hands it to this guy. Mail on Sunday? Oops. Next, we're back at the new apartment. We see a montage of George telling the tenant board of his harrowing tales, being handcuffed to a bed with his clothes stolen, being courted by a woman Nazi, shrinkage of his penis in the Hamptons, getting caught with the marble rye on a fishing rod. And then he closes his statement, and we see that everyone on the tenant board is very moved, even to tears, by George's testimony. As he gets up, he remembers to mention that Susan died because of invitations he picked out. And Mrs. Riccardi just loses it and cries out in grief. Mr. Eldridge is just shaking his head as George exits. Next, we're in Newman's apartment. Jerry is asking some mail delivery advice. Sometimes it says, do not bend. Newman's like, you just crease, crumple, cram. You'll do fine. And then Newman gets a phone call on his hot dog phone. Apparently he didn't get the transfer. They knew it wasn't him doing his route. Jerry's like, how? Too many people got their mail. He says close to 80%. No one has ever cracked the 50% barrier. It's like running the 3-minute mile. Jerry's like, oh, I tried my best. Exactly, Newman says. You're a disgrace to the uniform. And he rips the patch off the jacket. This is your jacket. Damn. Next, we're in the park. Elaine is walking and a bird hits her in the head. A man on the bench can't believe it. Never seen that before. It was like the bird couldn't avoid it. My take, it's a funny scene. I like these examples they use to show this progression of Elaine's big head insecurity. And the actor here, Fred Pinkard, he just steals the scene. The delivery of every line of dialogue is so funny. All right, next we're in Monks. George is feeling so great, so confident, telling Jerry there was no contest. He thinks he's got this in the bag. Elaine walks in with a scarf tied around her head. "What's with you?" Jerry asks. "Nothing, except a bird ran into my giant freak head." "What giant freak head?" "The one that sits atop my disproportionately puny body. I'm like a walking candy apple." Jerry can't believe that Alan's comment has gotten to her. You're playing right into his hands. She realizes he's right. I'm just going to call him up for another date and tell him that it doesn't bother me, laugh it off. Or jam a fork into his forehead. Either way, Jerry says. My take on this scene, I have to be honest, I have mixed feelings about the scene. I love Elaine's entrance with the scarf and her vibe of being totally defeated by Alan's comment. I think that's all really funny. But the whole setup of her calling him to meet again, it's a bit crowbarred in. I think it would have been funnier if they just ran into each other like the woman who threw coffee in his face. It's so minor. It's not terrible the way it is with her calling him for a date, but I think it could have been a bit more believable, because Seinfeld is so believable for her to run into him by chance and then stab him in the forehead. I mean, maybe she sees him at a restaurant and she tries to be all breezy and laugh it off, and he can still be like, "Hey, no, I'm sorry I said that," but then bring up the bump in her nose. Whatever. It's my nitpick for this episode. It's not a huge deal. I guess what I struggle with is why would it make her feel better to call him and laugh it off in his face? She just needs to get over it. Anyway, super nitpicky, but that's what I do sometimes. Next, we're in the restaurant. Elaine is there with Alan. He starts to apologize for what he said. She brushes him off. "Oh, we're way past it. So you have a big head," he says. He adds that it goes well with the bump in her nose. Then Elaine turns angry. "What?" We cut to the street and Kramer is walking and scratching behind his ear like a dog. A woman comes out from the restaurant and tells him to get the cops. A big-headed woman is attacking a man. She tells Kramer, "Tell the police it's the Old Mill restaurant. Hurry!" So Kramer runs and finds some cops and he gets a coughing attack. So like a dog barking, he communicates like Lassie to the cops and they miraculously understand him. Good boy, lead the way." And they all run down the road. My take, I love the turn, the quick, abrupt mood change when he mentions the bump in her nose. What? The look on her face is great. There's a tag to the episode. We're at the entrance of the new apartment. George is walking down the hall and finds Alan Mercer moving in. Elaine's big head guy? And he thinks he got the apartment because of being attacked by his ex-girlfriends. And he's got a new injury, the fork in the forehead from Elaine. He's like, "No, I just gave the super $50. George is so upset. He tells him he earned this apartment with 34 years of suffering. Tough luck, chinless, Alan says and closes the door. And George is like, whatever. But then he starts feeling his chin. Alan got to him as well. All right, I'm going to take a quick break and I will see you on the other side. We've all heard about the horrors of animal testing. Countless companies have treated lab rats with such cruelty in order to see the effects of their products, from makeup to fertilizer. Well, we at Nielsen Ratings want to do our part when it comes to protecting the rats. And that's why we've rescued over 15,000 lab rats over the past 10 years, so that we can use them in our own labs. But at Nielsen Ratings Labs, these rats will not develop cancerous tumors because they are just watching TV shows. With television content at an all-time high due to network, cable, and streaming channels, Nielsen Ratings Lab provides a service to network executives that will inform them whether or not to invest in certain projects. In order to maintain a comfortable environment for the rats, they are placed in homey cages, complete with couches and chairs and a fully stocked snack station. In each testing cage, they have the option to select a show from a menu. As they watch, we measure their brain activity, heart rate, and general demeanor. All of that data is heavily considered when making decisions about season renewals, cancellations, and reboots. The rattings, as we call them, have already impacted the landscape of television today. Why do you think the current season of Top Chef is in Wisconsin, the cheese capital of the USA? And it's no accident that Law & Order SVU has been on the air for 25 seasons. Rats love hargitay. The only side effects we've seen from our testing is some indigestion due to over-snacking while binging. And who hasn't been there? These rats are you, and you are these rats. They are happy, healthy, and determine the programming for over 85% of the content out there. Nielsen Ratings Lab. Are you enjoying Pedro Pascal in so many shows? Thank the rats! And we're back. There weren't very many extras that I wanted to go over, but I thought this was a good part of the show to bring up something else. I wanted to mention the dog cough and how it's always bugged me that they dubbed in a man's cough for the dog. Now, I've never had a dog, so I don't know a lot about dogs and their health. So I didn't even know, do dogs cough? And that's what I Googled. I literally Googled, do dogs cough? And they sure do. And I even watched a video of a dog coughing. This video was made by a veterinarian to discuss how to treat kennel cough. And I was like, I never thought I'd watch this, but I did. Anyway, the point is, it sounds like a dog coughing. It sounds like the dog's trying to get something out of its throat. And why didn't they just use that? The man cough dubbed in for the dog has irked me for 30 years now? I don't understand why that decision was made. Maybe they thought it was funnier. I guess it's probably funnier. I guess I need to digress. But anyway, at any rate, I got an education on whether or not dogs actually cough. Yes, they do. Kennel cough is a real thing and it's very serious, you guys. So make sure you get it treated. And that a dog coughing is very sad to see. And now it's time to open Greg's Sack Lunch. Every week, our most dedicated contributor to this podcast, Greg, sends us a sack full of his thoughts. So Greg's overall thoughts about the Andrea Doria. He says, this episode is pretty weak. While there's a few funny bits here and there, mostly with George and Elaine's plots, it doesn't save this from being a fairly boring episode. I would have to agree with you, Greg. I will get more into that with my final notes, but we're definitely on the same page. Next in Greg's sack, his favorite scenes and Elaine moments. He says, I love Elaine's use of the term stab-worthy since we've already heard her use sponge-worthy. One thing I've noticed happening more and more, though, is a whole storyline sort of leading up to a simple one-liner such as this, as if they had the joke and wanted to build something around it. Oh, that's interesting. I can definitely see that happening where you want to back into a one-liner or a funny term. But I don't know. I do think that this is a funny premise. It kind of stands on its own to find out that every ex-girlfriend of a guy has this vengeful streak in them. I think that in itself is interesting. But yeah, I could see it either way. But to your point, Greg, usually when something is backed into just to get a punchline out, it doesn't work very well. Next, Greg says, Elaine's best moment for me is when she gets self-conscious about her big head. Having had a pigeon flown into my own big head, I can sort of sympathize here. The line about the walking candy apple is one I remember hearing for the first time when it originally aired and laughing so hard at it. Whoa, Greg, I didn't know you got struck in the head by a pigeon. That's insane. Aren't New York City pigeons pretty bold, though? I can kind of see that happening. Probably wasn't an accident. Yeah, walking candy apple is great. I remember that was sort of, it was like lollipop head back in the waif era in the 90s where the models were so stick skinny that their heads were disproportionately big for their bodies. It was like, I think they were called lollipops or something, but it's kind of the same concept. Next in Greg's sack is his scene swap idea. He says, Kramer's story is absolute garbage, and Jerry helping Newman with delivering the mail just takes up too much time. Elaine's relationship could have been fleshed out a bit more, or just something more added to it to give it more juice. We're sort of left with little bits that are funny for her, but they're very quick and jammed into the much longer scenes the other characters get. It would have been more interesting to see Elaine seek out Alan's exes so she could find out a little bit more about why he hurls the insults. Totally. I like that suggestion. I definitely concur with you, Greg. In fact, I have my own scene swap ideas, and you're right. The Kramer thing is it's just too broad. I'm not a fan of it. The dog coughing, he doesn't trust doctor. It's too much. And him turning into a dog, again, just comes off as kind of hacky. Yeah, I like the idea of her seeking out the ex-girlfriends, finding out what their insult was. Like, she knows she's big head. But yeah, that could have been a fun game. Like I've talked about, the game of the plot, just writing around something that works really well. So this guy says the mean things to his girlfriends when they break up with him. Let's keep building on that. So much funnier than Jerry in a male uniform whistling. What? Such a waste of time. Next are Greg's extra thoughts. He says, I do love the line George has about how many people do you lose on a normal cruise ship? 30, 40? It's hilarious to me how he thinks that a national tragedy isn't devastating enough. Of course. I mean, that's exactly where his mind's going to go. But it does put it in perspective a little bit. Like, this guy wasn't on the Titanic. The odds didn't seem to be against this guy very much on the Andrea Doria. I'm sure it was a very harrowing experience, but I think George kind of has a point here. Like, hey, most people survived just fine. And lastly, Greg says, God, I love Frank and Estelle Costanza. I can't say it enough. Even 30 seconds of them just saves an otherwise crap episode. 100%, Greg. In fact, I would venture to say that scene is my favorite scene of the entire episode. The booth argument is so fantastic, so funny. Yeah, they deliver. No matter how short the scene, they deliver, and they're always memorable. Thank you so much, Greg, for sending in your thoughts this week. And now it's time to close Greg's sack lunch. All right, let's move on to my favorite Elaine moments. It's the shrug with Jerry in Monks. I love the what's more important than the look on both of their faces, but it's a pretty funny moment. And my final notes for the episode. I gotta say, this episode is very meh. It's not great. It's not terrible. As the kids say, it's mid. I do like the premise for Elaine. The story is fun and it's executed just fine. Like I said, very mid, very like whatever. Stab-worthy is fun. I like that kind of callback to Sponge-worthy. I do wish there was more comedy for JLD. Too much time in this episode is spent on the male crap, the dog shit. Dog shit. I would have swapped so much of the male and dog stuff for Elaine stooping to Alan's level. Like, how would she have insulted him back? That's the Elaine I want to see. Immature, insulting Elaine. Way more fun than Kramer acting like a dog and Jerry as a mailman. Just putting that out there. And I think that's all I can say about the Andrea Doria. Please be sure to follow Hot and Heavy on Instagram at Hot Heavy Elaine, on TikTok at Elaine Bennis Podcast. And if you'd like to email me, please do at elainepodcast@gmail.com. And also please rate and review the podcast. I'd love a 5-star rating from you guys. It really does help. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.